Hello, my name is Michael DeWan Herrick. I'm a psychotherapist and life coach with over 40 years of experience. I'm currently in private practice in London. This is the 18th video in my series under the title Questioning Woke Psychotherapy. In this video, I will talk about the movement to decolonize psychotherapy, which is just one area within the much larger woke agenda to decolonize curriculum at all levels and areas of education. Having examined many examples of what this entails for psychotherapy, I see that apparently there's a comprehensive set of things considered to be problematic about the accumulated knowledge and practice within the field, all of which have arisen from and been maintained by the pervasive and pernicious poison of racist white supremacy. All of these things need to be deconstructed, done away with, and replaced by something better. I've decided that rather than address the great number of items on this list of what needs to be decolonized from psychotherapy, that it would be more useful and simpler for now to expose the root or foundation that holds this entire project up, rather than deal with its many parts. Having reviewed a lot of decolonizing curriculum, I see four main intentions for it. 1, address the impact of colonization on clients. 2, address racism, including historical instances of it in psychotherapy. 3, challenge and deconstruct whiteness as it is embedded in psychology, psychotherapeutic theory and practice, including research. 4, increase cultural competence. If colonization means occupying and controlling a foreign geographical location and exploiting and oppressing the indigenous population there, then I agree with the first intention. Any client who has been impacted in this way should receive therapy from a therapist who understands and is sensitive to their experience. At the same time, I would say that a person who has immigrated to a predominantly white Western country is not automatically being oppressed simply because the dominant culture there does not match their original culture. That does not constitute colonization. I also agree that any instances of past racism in psychotherapy should be acknowledged, and that any current elements of it should be confronted and addressed. What exactly constitutes racism should be clearly defined, but in principle, I agree with the second intention. The trouble is that simply having cultural norms or professional standards, if you were white, is now deemed racist. Intention number 3 is where I have serious questions. Are all theory, praxis, and knowledge contributed by white people to be ipso facto deemed racist and shot through with white supremacy? That seems to be the assumption based on what I see in the decolonizing literature. If any knowledge generated by white Western people, especially men, contradicts what is considered to be true in another culture, then it is assumed to be oppressive. If a dominant culture is not allowed to have its own values and norms, the danger is that it won't be successful at integrating multiple cultures, a point often ignored by those championing multiculturalism, which often seems naive about the dangers of tribalism. Intention number 4, increasing cultural competence, also makes sense to me. With my bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology, I developed an appreciation for the value of understanding other cultures as well as possible and not being ethnocentric. However, as with so many other nice-sounding terms, cultural competence now seems to be a blanket term for the whole decolonizing crusade. I want to offer a quote from the Keele University in the UK that expresses their vision for decolonizing the curriculum. I think this also captures what I've seen elsewhere. Quote, decolonizing the curriculum means creating spaces and resources for a dialogue among all members of the university on how to imagine and envision all cultures and knowledge systems in the curriculum, and with respect to what is being taught and how it frames the world, unquote. On the surface, this sounds like a wonderful thing, but pause for a moment to really imagine what it would take to include all cultures and knowledge systems in the curriculum. If every course had to include all cultures, perspectives, and accumulated knowledge related to that particular topic, well, it couldn't be done. Students would be overwhelmed and confused, and constructors would have an impossible task from the beginning. Every course would require a PhD in cross-cultural anthropology as a prerequisite. To me, this noble intention is naive. As applied to psychology and psychotherapy, what it would take would displace much, if not most, of the vast corpus of material generated in the psychotherapy field over the past 100+ years. Conveying this alone to students is a daunting task that is already impossible. Reality demands that time constraints and the cost of education be contended with. We don't live forever, and most of us don't have unlimited financial resources. But now I want to get to the heart of my argument and examine two foundational aspects of the Woke Project to decolonize psychotherapy. I will frame these as two questions. One, how can any culture decolonize itself? And two, what intellectual tools and moral principles do decolonizers rely upon to do their work? Regarding the first question, this is the definition of colonization in a nutshell. The act or process of sending people to live in and govern another country, from the Cambridge Dictionary. If this is what colonization is, what country is psychotherapy or any other academic study sending people to live in and govern? The fact is, it's not. Psychotherapy is taught and practiced primarily in countries that either invented it or that have since culturally appropriated it. It's not seeking to occupy or govern another country. Maybe it has been created largely by white Western people. So what? Does every culture have a right to exist, to generate its own knowledge and pass that on to future generations? Or not? If people seek psychotherapy in the West and they happen to come from a non-Western culture with different ideas about reality, the causes of suffering and their remedy, should they expect the host culture to adopt their beliefs and abandon their own culture? Expecting sensitivity and respect for your own culture is a fair ask, but it isn't fair to expect a Western therapist to repudiate their own tradition to serve you. Should a Westerner visiting or living in an African village expect the local shaman to practice psychoanalysis and put away any beliefs about spirit possession? I think not. Decolonizing psychotherapy is a weird idea. It doesn't make sense, given what colonization actually is. Cultural awareness, sensitivity, competence make sense. So does awareness of racism. But just because racism was once used to justify colonization and slavery doesn't mean that wherever it appears now, there is colonization. That's just a conflation of terms. And just because white people think some stuff up doesn't automatically make it a white supremacist conspiracy. This conflation seems to serve the purpose of giving more moral weight to the project of deconstructing every artifact of white Western culture, of picking apart 100+ years of hard work in psychotherapy, for instance, with the assumption that it's all evil. I haven't seen a single decolonizing curriculum that says anything that's worthy of keeping in current academic traditions. So that's my first critique. Decolonization is the wrong word for what woke are trying to do to curriculums, including psychotherapy. Further, using this term, the implication is that Western culture does not have a right to exist. Its very assertion of any norms, values, or knowledge, what every culture does, is an oppressive colonizing force that must be undone. Not only can a culture not decolonize itself, but any attempt to do so represents a colonizing agenda from the outside. In our case, it's mostly an inside job. This is a remarkable sleight of hand. enter a culture or work from within it, to convince them all that their ideas about life are stupid and evil, tell them that any objections only prove your point, propose your own version of reality, and remake everything according to your utopian vision. And then there's my second question. What intellectual tools and moral principles do decolonizers rely upon to do their work? In other words, what's the intellectual and moral pedigree of the woke? Given that they are driven to deconstruct and demolish everything white, Western, European, and American, it is interesting and revealing to trace back where their ideas have come from. Let's start with the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, which emerged in the early 20th century, was primarily composed of scholars from Europe, particularly Germany. The core members of the Frankfurt School were predominantly of Jewish European descent. There were no prominent black members within the original Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School developed what's known as critical theory, which became the basis for critical social justice theory. It was elaborated on in various ways, but all of these ways drew on the Frankfurt School for the foundation of their ideas. Prominent writers from the Frankfurt School include Horkheimer, Adorno, Marcuse, Fromm, and Habermas, just to name a few. All of the following theories owe a debt to the Frankfurt School: critical race theory, feminist theory, post-colonial studies, queer theory, critical pedagogy. All of these intellectual traditions draw on or have been influenced by the Frankfurt School's critical theory. Of particular interest for this discussion about decolonizing the psychotherapy curriculum, Paulo Freire, author of Critical Pedagogy, was a Brazilian educator and philosopher of Portuguese descent, and his work primarily focused on education, pedagogy, and social justice. He's widely recognized for his contributions to critical pedagogy and his efforts to address issues of oppression and inequality through transformative education. Again, another white man of European descent. And what about Marxism? Who thought this up? Although others elaborated on it later, it was Marx, Engels, and Trotsky from Germany. Marx from Germany, Engels, and Trotsky were Russian, but all were white men. While there is debate about whether the woke are Marxist, given that Marx based his theory on economic inequality, which the woke tend to minimize, there is a definite connection to the idea of dividing human groups into oppressors and the oppressed. The so-called neo-Marxist or cultural Marxists divide human groups based on various identities, including an intersectional hierarchy from the most to the least oppressed, instead of economic class. And some social justice advocates, including the founders of BLM, have explicitly declared their Marxist agenda. So, once again, we find white European men at it with their nasty ideas, right? Not according to the woke. Marxist and neo-Marxist thinkers are their heroes. Now let's move on to postmodernism. Critical social justice has drawn very deeply from that well. The most influential of the postmodern thinkers were Foucault, Derrida, and Lyotard. All were white European men, all French in particular. Postmodernism has had an influence on critical social justice theory in its examination of language, power, identity, the deconstruction of grand narratives. Postmodernism's impact on critical social justice can be observed in various ways. 1. Deconstructing of grand narratives. Postmodernism's challenges the notion of universal or absolute truths and overarching narratives. Critical social justice theory incorporates this skepticism by questioning dominant narratives that uphold power structures and influence social hierarchies. 2. identity and difference. Postmodernism's emphasis on the multiplicity of identities and the rejection of fixed categories has influenced critical social justice's focus on intersectionality. Understanding the complexities of identities and how various social categories intersect informs the approach to addressing inequality and oppression. 3. Language and power. Postmodernism's examination of language as a tool of power and its role in constructing reality has influenced critical social justice in its analysis of discourse, representation, and the ways in which language reinforces or challenges social norms and power relations. 4. Diversity and pluralism. Postmodernism's celebration of diversity and pluralism aligns with critical social justice's emphasis on recognizing and valuing diverse experiences, perspectives, and social positions. 5. Epistemic and cultural relativism. Postmodernism's questioning of objective truth and embrace of relativism has prompted critical social justice theorists to consider different knowledge systems, cultural perspectives, and subjective experiences in understanding and addressing social inequalities. So clearly, postmodernism is woven into the woke way of thinking. More white supremacists coming from white male intellectuals? I think not. And let's not forget that before postmodernism, there was modernism. Although this was a separate movement that followed the Enlightenment, it contained many of the ideas that arose from the Enlightenment, which we might think of as a different flavor of woke once upon a time. Interesting that it was followed by critiques that have tried to point out its blind spots. Sound familiar? Among the main contributions of the Enlightenment, these two stand out. 1. Reason and empiricism. Instead of blind faith belief in received religious doctrines, we now had scientific method for seeking truth. Although Francis Bacon laid the groundwork for this prior to the Enlightenment, it was later in the Enlightenment refined and more widely promoted. 2. Universal human rights and individualism, which includes equality and liberty and freedom of thought and expression and religious tolerance. So, there was a historical shift both intellectually and morally. We changed our ideas about what is true and what is good. Critical social justice is not too keen on reason and empiricism. It uses postmodern arguments to deconstruct their opponent when it suits their cause, but then slyly marshals studies and statistics and the science to bolster their own arguments. The moral contributions of the Enlightenment, however, are a different matter. Without the idea of universal human rights and equality, the woke would have nothing to stand on. We who are lucky enough to enjoy them have come to take these ideas for granted. Their self-evident truth was not evident on a massive level at all until a bunch of white European men started pointing it out in the 17th and 18th centuries. In time, this became the basis for the development of liberal democracies and what came with liberal democracies. Basically, an attempt to realize the political and moral dimensions of the Enlightenment. Critical social justice examines and challenges us in areas where we are not fully realizing the ideals of a liberal democracy. We have been and continue to be imperfect in terms of equality for all. While it provides an important reminder and pressure to continue to address any and all inequalities, it nevertheless does so from a position rooted in those principles, which derive mostly from white Western men. This is who they heard it from first, even if they can point out some indigenous North American tribe that had a collective decision-making process resembling democracy. In its relentless attack on whiteness, the woke seem to have no awareness or appreciation for where the intellectual tools and moral principles that give it a leg to stand on came from. It also seems to overlook the fact that it was white British and American people who finally brought an end to slavery, based on the notions of universal human rights, equality, and freedom, which came out of the Enlightenment. This even though, yes, they were both colonizers, but are no more. And that's the point. What an absurd irony. This relentless focus on what has been wrong and imperfect with white Western traditions, seeking to dismantle them entirely, all while relying on intellectual tools and moral principles derived from those very traditions they attack. This is true for decolonizing psychotherapy as well as decolonizing other curriculum. It's a dishonest project. As I have said since my first video, in this series, my intention has been not only to provide a critique of woke psychotherapy, it's also to recognize and preserve whatever good intention and truths it has to offer. So I'll end with this. The woke fight for justice and equality for all people is righteous and good. Psychotherapy is a place where these values also come into play and can be a part of the psychotherapeutic process. And therapists should have this on their radar as well as some skills for working with it. What is not good is a comprehensive racist demonization of white people and everything they have ever contributed to the world. And doing this with apparently no awareness and no appreciation for their own intellectual and moral foundations, which come from the very demon they wish to destroy. As if out of their own innate moral superiority they have spontaneously taken their positions, when any one of them could have been a slave owner or a genocidal crusader in an earlier time and place. That's it for now. If you like this video, please give it a like. Subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, share the video with a friend, and until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, be well, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.